Fish 16. Yoga, religion. Yoga and religion, defined. The English word, religion, originates from the Latin verb, religare, meaning, to join, or, to unite. It is the precise equivalent of the Sanskrit noun, yoga, from the verbal root, yuj, to attach, harness, or yoke. Thus, religion, yoga implies union with the Supreme Self, or, to provide a more accurate and profound definition, the understanding and realization that there is nothing but the Supreme Self, Paramatman, in Sanskrit. Other definitions include union of the body and the mind, and union with God, both of which are valid in the appropriate context. Perhaps the best definition of yoga, religion, is the union of the relative and the absolute, suggesting one who has fully realized himself or herself to be, in essence, the very ground of being, Brahman, in Sanskrit, but knows precisely how to integrate that understanding within temporal existence, just as, for example, Rabbi Jesus Christ so admirably demonstrated during his public ministry in Israel, 2 millennia ago. A similar understanding of the terms, yoga, and religion, to that given above, would be as follows: religion, yoga, is the union of the external and internal worlds. This idea refers to an authentic, harmonious integration of a human being's outlook of the external sphere of material objects, which includes other minds and intellects, and one's internal way of being. This interpretation comports with the definition of yoga, found in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, who codified various schools of Samkhya and Yoga about 2000 years ago, in India. The origin of religion according to tradition. According to some sources, yoga, authentic religion, was introduced to human society over 12,000 years ago, by the Adiyogi, first religionist, Mahadeva Shiva, in his form known as Dakshinamurti, in the subcontinent of Bharata, India. Lord Shiva, Pran. Shiva, is universally recognized to be the first avatar, avatara, in Sanskrit. An avatara is a man who is a pure embodiment of the divine, sanctified from birth, and usually devotes his life to spreading transcendental knowledge. See the glossary entry under avatara for a far more extensive definition. Another source claims that religion, authentic yoga, began when the Hindu demiurge, Lord Brahma, spoke the 4 Veda books of knowledge in Sanskrit, in the ancient Vedic Samskritam tongue of northern Bharata, composed of mantras, benedictions, rituals, and prayers, but the essential teachings of which are non-dualistic, that is to say, describe everything existential having the same ground of being. In other words, all is one, without a second. Sarvam Kalvidam Brahma, Chandogyopanishad 3.14, a portion of Sama Veda, teaches that all this is verily Brahman, Brahman, referring to the totality of existence, non-existence. Alternatively, those who are accomplished in the study of the Vedas consider the 4 Vedas to be aparusaya, meaning not of a man, superhuman, and impersonal, authorless, revelations of sacred sounds and texts heard by ancient sages after intense meditation. Read earlier chapters of FISH to fathom monism, non-duality. Whether or not these historical events really occurred is irrelevant to the purposes of this chapter, and to the implications of this scripture. NB. The male deity, Sri Brahma, referred to as the creator god within the Trinity, Trimurti, in Sanskrit, of supreme divinity in Vedic religion, which includes the gods Sri Vishnu and Sri Shiva, is not to be confused with Brahman, which is a genderless, abstract metaphysical concept. The origin of religion according to the world teacher. NB. Before reading this section, it shall prove beneficial for the reader to study the following chapter, in order to become familiar with the concept of spiritual awakening, and how awakening experiences are distinguished from the quite unrelated notion of enlightenment. In the considered opinion of this author, it is far more likely that religion started when we human beings evolved to the necessary degree, that we began experiencing spiritual awakenings, probably about 10 to 20,000 years ago. This is plausible for the following 2 reasons. Firstly, the most ancient recognized metaphysical position, non-duality, Advaita, in Sanskrit, is the most common conclusion of those who have undergone a spiritually transformative experience, commonly called awakening, a peak experience, cosmic consciousness, unitive consciousness, and far, far, far less accurately, enlightenment. So, when certain individuals began to experience such awakenings, either by observing some kind of contemplative practice, with drugs, or most probably, entirely spontaneously, they would ponder their experiences from an intellectual perspective, and start to formulate explanations for their strange experiences. Subsequently, these Buddhas, a Sanskrit, Pali term for an awakened being, would most likely share their experiences with others, including those who had also experienced some kind of awakening episode, and in time, codify their realizations in the form of aphoristic verses, to be passed on to their student disciples. Eventually, these aphorisms would be memorized, written down and embellished by succeeding generations, and come to be known as Holy Scriptures. Those who have studied the two oldest extant religious traditions, Vedic Dharma and Judaism, will undoubtedly acknowledge this theory to be quite credible, for upon exploring their sacred texts, the evidence is overwhelming, and consistent, too, with the development of secular institutions. Qualitatively similar to such awakening events are those experiences that transpire following the ingestion of mind-altering substances, and it is well known that humans have been using psychoactive drugs for several thousand years, in order to get high. In order to provide just one illustration of this phenomenon, consider the case of the Sufi mystics of medieval Persia, such as the two world-famous Farsi poets, Jalal ad-Din Muhammad Rumi and Khwaja Shams ad-Din Muhammad Hafiz-e Shirazi, and how they came to a largely non-dualistic, monistic, understanding of ultimate reality, despite being born into zealously Islamic communities, and indeed, put their very lives at risk by composing texts that were surreptitiously antithetical to the monotheistic system of religion predominant in their nations, countries. Furthermore, the writings of some of these sages are taken to be veritable holy books by a significant proportion of the population of people residing in their homelands, if not in name, then definitely in the amount of honor and respect that is lavished upon their poetry. In this case, and in the case of mystics originating from various other times and places, it seems obvious that they have undergone certain religious experiences that point towards a thoroughly non-dual metaphysical schema, entirely independent from the cultural milieu. Even though this book was composed by someone who was indoctrinated into a number of devotional religious organizations, ultimately, it may be seen as a continuation of this mystical tradition, since this author fully shed that indoctrination, following decades of progressive spiritual awakening. Secondly, as alluded to above, it was necessary for the human species to sufficiently evolve, not only biologically, but even more importantly, socially and linguistically, to the level where we could reconcile our mystical experiences with our mundane daily lives, rather than focus our attention entirely on survival, especially before the agricultural revolution, approximately 20,000 years ago. For the greater part of our history, we were preoccupied with gathering sufficient foodstuffs, in order to simply stay alive. A skeptic could easily dismiss religion, in general, by noting that, because religion was not instantiated at the very commencement of the Homo sapiens species, it is merely a man-made institution, and therefore, extrinsic to our psyche. Hopefully, this book, considered as a whole, will prove this assertion to be a fallacious claim. Part of such skepticism is due to the fact that those who hold the anti-religious position grossly misunderstand the very definition of the term religion. If irreligious folk claim that there is no evidence for a supreme creator God, then obviously, they are absolutely correct. Yet, religion is not founded upon the belief in any gods, God, or any other belief system whatsoever, but upon union of the self with the self. Rather than being a social construct, religion is simply the discovery that there is more to life than purely the observable universe, and that it is possible for humans to live a completely harmonious existence, by uniting ourselves with a higher power, that is, in actual fact, our very self. The development of religion. Since the prehistoric period, systems of religion have evolved, or have been developed, revealed by prophetic figures, on the continent of Asia. Supernatural mythologies and superstitions developed in many other locations too, most of which featured animistic narratives and primitive rituals, but not quite to the same philosophical level of the monotheistic and monistic religions of Middle East Asia, Bharata, India, and China. At present, there exists literally thousands of diverse religious teachings and spiritual paths, though they all necessarily conform to at least one of the four systems of yoga described below. This holy book is the culmination of several millennia of metaphysical understandings and moral, ethical rules, laws, or to be more precise, the law, dharma, in Sanskrit, and accordingly, is the pinnacle of all religious teachings. So, just as human beings evolved over hundreds of thousands of years to understand more and more of our external surroundings, such as how to start a fire in order to keep warm, and how to plant our own food crops, instead of gathering vegetation in the wild, and subsequently, gain a greater knowledge of the universe, or cosmos, such as in the fields of physics and cosmology, we gradually develop the necessary cognitive capacities to understand the inner world, that is, our psychological states, including the awakening experiences alluded to above. I am sure that many of us do not even realize that the study of human psychology as an academic discipline was a very recent development in our history. The mere fact that this book is light years ahead of any previously composed treatise on religion, metaphysics, ethics is powerful evidence of the above assertions, that science and religion, both, are ever evolving within our species. Therefore, the accusation that religion is nothing more than a man-made construct may well apply to popular misconceptions of religion, but not so much to actual religion, yoga. Additionally, anthropologists and evolutionary psychologists are continuously learning more of the history of Homo sapiens' advancement over the course of our species, including the discovery that human beings have a unique gene that enables a linear, stepwise, chronological analysis of unidimensional processes in the physical world. The development of new capacities of intellect and rationality made possible the development of tools, language, agriculture, permanent settlements, towns, cities, trade, transportation, communication, government, law, economics, the arts, education, scientific and technological research, precisely in a similar fashion to how spirituality and religion developed. The exigency of religion. When we humans are born into this world, we fully depend on our parents, teachers, and society to raise and educate us. Those of us who were born into a religious family are taught to believe that our particular religion has all the answers to our most fundamental questions: who really are we? From where do we come? What is the right way to behave? What is the purpose, meaning of life? Etc., and that its scripture is the rule book for life. Everything we need to know about life, and how to live a perfect life, is to be found within that alleged holy book. Unfortunately, until this particular sacred scripture, FISH, was composed, there had never been a single book, or a single teacher, that rationally explained existence, the meaning of life, and how we humans can live life in an ideal manner. The most popular scriptures, such as the Buddhist canon, the Judeo-Christian, Holy Bible, the Islamic, Quran, and the Vedic texts such as Bhagavad Gita, do not, sad to say, provide a comprehensive teaching that applies to all peoples at all times and places, despite what some of their adherents may claim. It is imperative to note that, totally paradoxical to the understanding of most humans, monotheism, or any other belief system, per se, does not adhere to the most profound definitions of yoga, religion given above. Is the belief in leprechauns, unicorns, or any other mythical creature a bona fide religion? No, of course not. Then why would the belief in a transcendent person, God, be classified as a religion? As amply demonstrated in the 7th chapter of this book, the notion of a supreme divine person is intensely antithetical to common logic. Religion is predestined. Union with the divine has no circumstantial prerequisites. It is not necessary to do anything in particular in order to awaken from one's own ignorance and to become self-realized, that is, to make real the true self. Spiritual awakening occurs according to the preordained story of life, as explained in this final instruction sheet for humanity, although most, but not all, persons who experience awakening liberation, and enlightenment, do so after practicing some form of religion, yoga, just as most persons, but not all, who become wealthy perform wealth creation activities, such as operating a business enterprise or composing a popular song. Some become instantly wealthy by being born into an aristocratic family, winning a lottery, gambling in a casino, by being the recipient of a donation, or by being the beneficiary of a bequeathed fortune. Many religionists use the term, God's grace, for this process, although it is more accurate to attribute it to predestination, cf. Ch. 11. Union with the divine, see the glossary entry under that word, for here, it is used rather differently to its etymological definition, is essentially just a matter of living one's life according to the principle of non-harm, ahimsa, in Sanskrit, for when one is living a perfectly harmless existence, one is automatically elevated to a state of being that is akin to one who is, purportedly, in union with the Supreme Self, or God. In order to put it more parsimoniously, when a human refrains from executing deliberately harmful acts, as fully explicated in Chapter 12, for an extended period of time, the sense of peace gained is practically identical to what religionists refer to as yoga, or union with the divine. Practically all religious precepts are prescriptive, that is, they instruct their followers to perform certain actions in order to achieve a particular objective. However, arguably the most beneficial teachings are descriptive, that is, they describe existence as it is, knowing that nothing can be done to alter the course of history. If a certain event is destined to take place, nothing or nobody can prevent that destined occurrence. The four systems of yoga, religion. There are four systems of yoga, religion, roughly corresponding to four facets of the human being: physical, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual, in order from the least efficacious to the most profound, in the considered opinion of the current world teacher himself. 1. The religion of action, labor. This is the simplest method of union with God, known as Karma Yoga, in Bharata, and is recommended by some experts as the one with which to begin one's spiritual journey. It involves a worker or businessman, or even a monarch, performing his duties, with the goal of using his excess funds to support his spiritual preceptor or his church, temple, mosque. It may also include performing beneficial deeds for one's master, such as cleaning his house or temple. Karma Yoga is the least discussed system of religion, possibly because it is, as mentioned, rather simplistic, and because it is extremely unlikely that a karma yogi can ever attain to full union via this path alone. Even though the author of this holy scripture is the current world teacher, he began his adult spiritual journey by diligently practicing karma yoga in the temple of a local religious organization. So, even though it may seem simplistic and inane, working for God is truly a wonderful introduction to the spiritual path, even if it rarely, as a solitary path, results in a practitioner becoming a fully awakened and enlightened sage. 2. Devotional religion, yoga, by far and away the most popular form of religion, but also the most perilous. This system of religion, known as Bhakti Yoga, in Sanskrit, involves reading, or hearing, about the personal conception of the Absolute, usually a divine incarnation, offering prayers to God, singing or chanting hymns, performing rituals, and serving the spiritual teacher, with the goal of totally surrendering one's will. The peril lies in the fact that a large number of devotees become radicalized towards their own group or spiritual leader, guru, in Sanskrit, unwilling to accept the validity of other traditions or paths. This is one reason why atheists seem to be antagonistic towards religion in general. After carefully studying Chapter 07, one may well inquire, if there is no supreme creator God, how then can devotion to such a fictitious character be an act of religion, that is, union with the divine? Well, as explained earlier in this chapter, the notion of yoga, religion, is not necessarily bound to a belief in God. Otherwise, many adherents of non-theistic Hinduism, such as Advaita Vedanta, and Buddhist monastics, would be exempt from any reference to religion, when in fact, the opposite is closer to the truth of the matter. Some of, if not all of, the most religious humans in history were atheists. Actually, I would go so far as to assert that religion, yoga, has nothing whatsoever to do with any kind of belief, what to speak of the belief in an old man perched in the clouds, or in the case of one major non-Abrahamic faith system, a blackish-blue Indian youth, tending a herd of cows. Rather, religion, yoga is a purely experiential state, that is, the holistic experience of cosmic unity. Therefore, if one is keen to pursue the path of bhakti, no matter to which religious organization one belongs, one is urged to focus one's devotion towards a living spiritual guide, as defined and described in the 20th chapter of this book, rather than towards an imaginary character from an ancient pseudo-religious myth. In any case, how do adherents of devotional religions achieve union with the divine, if there is no personal deity to speak of? By diligently practicing the aforementioned devotional exercises, especially prayers and rituals, performed with genuine love and affection for one's priest, guru, one's mind becomes cleansed of impurities, in the form of superfluous, unwholesome thoughts and desires, and ideally, finds lasting peace. Thus, yoga, that is, union, is achieved. However, in order to transcend the sentimental disposition of the typical bhakta, Sanskrit for religious devotee, one must divert one's attention to the study of philosophy, especially to the investigation of orthodox metaphysics encapsulated within Jnana Yoga, that is, the path of knowledge, or Gnosticism, outlined below. The essence of love is the desire for all living beings to find true happiness. When we want the best for all creatures, we can then honestly say that we love everybody equally. One who appears to love one person more than another, in fact, loves nobody. True, unconditional love revolves around sacrificing one's selfish desires for those of one's superiors, whether they be one's parents, husband, employer, or spiritual master, even if they are imperfect. Should a child disobey its mother just because the mother is flawed? Of course not. This paradigm is applicable to everyone, without exception. Even world teachers and avatars themselves regularly worship their masters and past masters. 3. The eight-limb yoga system, Ashtanga Yoga, as it is known in the ancient language of Bharata, has a defined series of 8 steps or stages, beginning with moral dictums or ethical injunctions, and culminating in a state of steady mind, or unwavering intellect, called samadhi. In his Yoga Sutras, the ancient Indian sage Patanjali defined the 8 limbs as follows: yama, abstinences; niyama, observances; asana, posture; pranayama, breath control; pratyahara, withdrawal of the senses; dharana, concentration; dhyana, meditation; and finally, samadhi, absorption. Samadhi is by far the most misunderstood concept in yoga. It refers to a steady state of peaceful mind, which is actually the natural state of being of the human mind, and not to some ecstatic or enstatic feeling of euphoric bliss, which is, by nature, just temporary. Despite what most yogis believe, the third stage of this yoga system does not involve a multitude of complex physical poses, but simply sitting with one's legs crossed and locked, with one's arms fully extended and resting on the knees. The purpose of yogis recommending that one sit in this lotus position, Padmasana, in Sanskrit, or at least simple seated postures, was in order to execute meditation and concentration in the higher steps. The myriad stretching exercises were devised in later centuries, presumably for those persons who were too inflexible to sit immediately in Padmasana. Despite stating this, modern yoga poses are highly recommended for anyone and everyone, whether theistic or irreligious, because they bestow enormous benefits to one's health, particularly as one advances in age. This was something that I learned the hard way, unfortunately. Ashtanga Yoga is ideal for those who are averse to theistic religions, as belief in God is non-basal to its adherents. 4. The Yoga of Knowledge is famous as Jnana Yoga in Bharata, and as Gnosticism in European-based languages, and is founded upon the investigation and contemplation of advanced metaphysical concepts, with the aim of self-realization, that is to realize that the universal self alone is real, in the Vedic, Upanishadic sense of the word. It is conceivable that, in the future, the study of neuroscience and physics, especially quantum mechanics, will become a canonical aspect of Jnana Yoga, or possibly even entirely replace traditional Jnana Yoga, if physics is able to conclusively demonstrate the logical, obvious fact that the human being is an expression of the All, Brahman, in Sanskrit. In the Western world, academic philosophy, coupled with theoretical physics, particularly since the late 19th century, has become the most widespread expression of Gnosticism, since it endeavors to uncover the foundations of life and of existence, even though, in general, secular philosophy lacks the dharmic aspect of yoga, that is, the moral obligations and societal duties incumbent on a religious practitioner. No matter what system of religion one initially practices, it is virtually mandatory for an aspiring religionist, sadhaka, or yogi, in Sanskrit, to have a deep inclination towards the systematic study of the king of sciences, or royal secret, as Lord Krishna refers to this yoga, in the Bhagavad Gita portion of Mahabharata, if he is to become truly enlightened, as defined in the next chapter. Despite its name, this path of knowledge can include acts of loving devotion towards one's teacher, thus integrating the heart and the mind, as well as periodic meditation. Much of this holiest of all holy scriptures, a final instruction sheet for humanity, could easily be classified under this system of religion, which explains why very few persons actually study this document. This yoga, by nature, attracts only highly intelligent and rational seekers. As with Ashtanga Yoga, Jnana Yoga is an ideal path for atheists, at least those atheists who possess an inordinately high intelligence quotient. I.e., Gnosticism, in the strictly etymological sense of the word, and not to be confused with any religious sect, where the word is capitalized. Why practice exclusively one path? There is no reason why one cannot practice more than one yoga, religious system simultaneously, but the typical person is usually attracted to devotional religion, because it is the most instinctual one. A child is instinctively attached to his or her parents, in a strong familial bond, and the attachment between a devotee and his teacher, or to an avatara, or a conception of the personal God, is a natural extension of this bond. No matter which of the four systems of religion, or combination of such, one chooses to practice, it is all but obligatory to observe the first two stages of Ashtanga Yoga, that is, to understand the importance of adherence to basic moral precepts, such as non-violence and self-restraint. Undoubtedly, the biggest problem with spiritual seekers, no matter to which tradition, organization, or individual guru they may happen to follow, is their failure to begin their journeys with fundamental moral observances and base denials. Not that the standard yama and niyama precepts are perfect, but they are certainly superior to the hedonistic lifestyle of irreligious, adharmavadan, in Sanskrit, folk. For example, one of the yama, truthfulness, satya, in Sanskrit, is not an absolute injunction, as properly explicated in chapter 12. I am quite certain that you, the reader, if questioned by an escaped serial rapist, as to where are your womenfolk, you would not hesitate to lie to that evildoer. I know that I would lie in such a case, and I would be completely and utterly free of any guilt whatsoever, since I would be adhering to Dharma. The direct path, a fifth system. However, the most beneficial spiritual practice is to rest imperturbably as flawless awareness, that is, to regress into one's inner self, the undeniable sense of being, or the sense of the unqualified, I am, or return attention to its source, without the affliction of any belief system, thus transcending all mundane concepts. This can occur during virtually any daily activity, and if practiced for short periods throughout the day, it eventually becomes one's normal way of being. This is sometimes referred to as the direct path, or somewhat less accurately, as the pathless path. In this practice, there is no separation of what is aware and of what appears, no presumption of a perceiver and a perceived, or of a doer and what is done. Other contemplative techniques often are focused on an object, such as a person, usually God, or a specially formulated prayer, mantra, in Sanskrit, whereas this form of meditation is the simple recognition of the eternal self by the eternal self. When coupled with a conscious avoidance of the 5 forms of suffering, due to the abandonment of the notion of personal authorship, mentioned in the previous chapter, this self-abidance brings about pure peace. A peace that surpasses anything previously imagined, truly beyond human understanding. This perfect peace is the fundamental nature of our existence. This is genuine yoga, religion, union of the self with the self, for there is but one existence consciousness peace, Sakhidananda, or Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma, in Sanskrit. Any other practice merely reinforces the notion of a separate, independent agent, which is the very root of material bondage, samsara, in Sanskrit, or to be more precise, the cause of all actual, psychological, suffering, dukkha, in Sanskrit. Read chapter 15 in this regard. So, just as Karma Yoga is designed for the physical aspect of the human person, Bhakti Yoga for the emotional facet, Jnana Yoga intended to appeal to the intellect, and Astanga Yoga designed for the spiritual aspect, this proposed fifth system of yoga is concerned with the egoic aspect of the human being. To put it succinctly, it is the conversion of the false ego, ahamkara, in Sanskrit, to the real ego, that is, I am that I am. Conclusion. The concept of religion, yoga, and that of law, dharma, are very intimately linked. In fact, one could say that the two are practically identical, since one who has achieved union with the Supreme Self, is one who, in essence, fully adheres to the law of non-harm, ahimsa, in Sanskrit. Read chapter 12, regarding the notion of law, dharma. Furthermore, the following chapter, ch. 17, may be considered an extension of this one. The multiplicity is only apparent. This is the doctrine of the Upanishads, and not of the Upanishads only. The mystical experience of the union with God regularly leads to this view, unless strong prejudices stand in the West. There is no kind of framework within which we can find consciousness in the plural. This is simply something we construct because of the temporal plurality of individuals, but it is a false construction. The only solution to this conflict, insofar as any is available to us at all, lies in the ancient wisdom of the Upanishads. From Mein Weltansicht, My View on the World. Erwin Rudolf Joseph Alexander Schrödinger. Austrian physicist. The mind that seeks happiness, or enlightenment, is like a character in a movie in search for the screen. It will never find the screen in the movie, although everything it finds is made of the screen. The mind that longs for enlightenment or happiness will never find what it is longing for. And yet, it is made out of what it is longing for. The question, am I aware? Is a thought. The answer, yes, is a thought. What takes place between those two thoughts? The experience of being aware that I am aware. Rupert Spira. English potter, i.e., a member of the working class, who is literally stealing the occupation of a priest, yet a possessor of a scrap of wisdom. If the world hates you, you know that it has hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love its own. But because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, because of this the world hates you. Remember the word that I said to you, a slave is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will also persecute you. If they kept my word, they will keep yours also. John 15:18-20. Lord Jesus Christ, as quoted by John the Beloved. N.B. The two spellings, yoga, and yoga, are essentially identical. Like many Sanskrit terms that are transliterated into other tongues, there are multiple conventions available. Unfortunately, in some cases, the transliterated word is often written so inaccurately that it seems to be a completely different word. Possibly the most notable example of this discrepancy is the way the Sanskrit word, Brahmana, was originally transliterated as Brahman, most probably by British Indologists, at some point of time following the colonization of Bharata. The only reason I have used both spellings in this chapter, apart, that is, from its use in the title, is due to the fact that the IAST spelling, yoga, did not fit in certain paragraphs, spilling over onto a new line, and thus spoiling the structure and tidiness of those paragraphs.